Chapter 4 Beowulf. Hrothgar's poets took the story of Grendel with them wherever they went. One of them told it in the court of Hygelac, king of the Geats, which lay far from the land of the Danes, over the stormy sea. He found eager listeners to his tale. "We've heard of the great hall Heorot," said Hygelac. "Men say its timbers reach up to the clouds, and that its golden roofs can be seen a day's march away, brighter than the sun itself." "The men tell true," answered the poet, "for that is how Heorot is by day. But by night, it's a different story. After darkfall, the hall stands abandoned. No one dare go there." "For fear of Grendel?" "For fear of Grendel." Now King Hygelac had a nephew, and his nephew's name was Beowulf. Beowulf was only a young man, but already he had won fame on account of his goodness and daring. In his person, Beowulf was below average in size. He looked taller sitting down than standing up, because his broad chest and shoulders were out of proportion to his legs, which were short. He had straight brown hair and strong wrists. People found it difficult to say what was memorable or remarkable about his face, but all remembered it. He had a way of looking straight at a person he was talking to, his shoulders set square, his hands on his knees, his eyes unwavering, that always struck others as honest and open. And when someone spoke to him, he sat just as still and attentive, listening with his eyes. In fact, Beowulf's eyes were not strong, and part of their sensitivity was due to his not seeing too well. As a boy, he had been fond of playing with bees. Beowulf means the bee hunter. And one day, an angry swarm had attacked his face, stinging his cheeks and eyelids rather badly. Whether or not this was responsible for his short sight, who could say? But certainly the stings had been deep and painful enough to keep him in a darkened room for weeks. And when he emerged into daylight again, he found things seemed more misty and distant than before. A setback like this did not daunt him. He did not even blame the bees. Beowulf was the rare kind of person who makes strength of his own weaknesses. His eyes being poor, he determined to see not just as well as other people, but better than most. He did this by cultivating habits of quickness and concentration that enabled him to be truly seen, where others were only looking. And this matter of the eyes was typical of his whole manner of being. Beowulf had made the best of all he had, putting each imperfection to work in the service of his integrity. Thus, his real strength lay in the balance of his person, which is perhaps another way of saying that he was strong because he was good, and good because he had the strength to accept the things in him that were bad. When Beowulf had heard all the stories about the dreadful deeds of the demon Grendel, he determined to go and help Hrothgar, if he could. His ship was made ready, a fine seaworthy craft with a great curved prow. He chose 14 men to go with him. They were brave, indomitable fellows, well tested in battle, and willing to follow their hero wherever he went. However, it was not merely for their skill as warriors that Beowulf picked them. He had heard enough about Grendel to know the monster could not be killed by strength alone. Wind filled the sails, and the ship sped forward. The second day, they came in sight of the land of the Danes. As they were disembarking, a man came galloping along the beach toward them. He carried a long spear, and his horse kicked up a stinging shower of shingle as he drew rein. "Halt!" he cried in a voice like thunder. "Who are you who dare to land so brazenly on Hrothgar's coast? What do you want, and why do you come bearing so many weapons? If you are pirates, then be warned by me. I have only to set this horn to my lips and sound the warning note, and you will be met by such an army that not one of you shall ever see home again." Beowulf nodded, tossing shells into the sea. Some of his men had reached for their swords, but with an easy flick of his wrist, he motioned them to stop. "We are no pirates," he said. "Who are you?" The horseman drew himself up proudly. "I am Hrothgar's coast guard," he shouted. No one bent on mischief gets past me." Beowulf did not shout, but his voice sounded clear and distinct over the noisy waves and crying of seabirds. "I am Beowulf, son of Ethgeo," he said, "and I come to do what I can against the demon Grendel." A shiver went down the Coast Guard's weather-beaten cheek. It was plain that though he was a brave man, he did not like to hear about Grendel. Beowulf went on calmly. "If you love your country, as I'm sure you do, then you'll help, not hinder us. Show us this way to the great hall Heorot." The Coast Guard was impressed by the quiet strength of the stranger speaking. He thought a moment and then he said, "I will escort you to Hrothgar myself. He can decide the seriousness of your errand. I'm just a common warrior sent to guard the shores, and I can't see how your little band can stand against a fiend like Grendel." He leaned forward confidently in his saddle. "If you take my private advice," he added, "you'll pack back in your ship before you are all killed. The man's not born who can get the better of Grendel. The king is quite resigned to it. Fighting that monster? Why, it's like fighting the sea. You can't win." Beowulf's men muttered angrily amongst themselves. They found the Coast Guard's words insulting. Beowulf did not seem insulted. He looked out over the rolling waves, as though considering what the Coast Guard had said. "Thank you for your advice," he said at last, "but I will not take it." The Coast Guard shrugged. "Then you are either the bravest man in the world or a simple fool. Get your men in marching order. I will lead you to Heorot. Don't worry about your ship. Let it ride here at anchor, and I'll have my soldiers guard it." He smiled grimly, wheeling his horse about. "I shan't say they'll keep it safe for you until you come back, because I doubt very much whether you will come back, any of you, if it's really Grendel you're after." Beowulf's men wore coats of mail. Their helmets had golden boar crests on them. They carried swords and ash spears, tipping with iron. Armor and equipment proved heavy in the midday sun. They clanked along, uncomplaining, sweat pouring down their faces, in single file behind the Coast Guard's horse. Beowulf looked about him as he marched, taking everything in. Tall cliffs and deep valleys, each tumbling stream and pebble winking brightly in the sun. His head moved on his shoulders like a bird's, alert, inquisitive, and shrewd. Before long, they came in sight of Heorot. The shining of the palace astonished them. It looked like a tower of solid gold. Beyond it, shrouded in the mist, even on a day like this, lay the fen. To Beowulf, perhaps because of his short sight, Hall Heorot appeared even brighter than it was, and the Badlands darker. He stood on a grassy mound gazing down at the gold and black for a long while, until his men began to grow restless, and the Coast Guard's horse flared its nostrils wide, impatient to be back within smelling distance of the sea. Then Beowulf thanked the Coast Guard for showing them the way and led his men along the winding stone road to Heorot. The Coast Guard watched them go, thinking how brave and doomed they look, until they were so far away that he could no longer hear the clinking of their armor. He saw that Beowulf had left his sword stuck on the top of the mound. It shone in the sunlight like a cross.